We're going to talk about what's going on in Israel right now, and no one better to join us for that type of conversation than Rabbi Jack Zimmerman. He's a Messianic Jewish rabbi, born originally in the New York City area, I believe today involved at the Tree of Life congregation in Phoenix, Arizona, and a speaker traveling the country. He's also a part of Jewish Voice. We'll talk about all that on NBL today. He's been in our area. He spoke at Rose City Kids a number of months ago, and I became a friend of Rabbi Jack. I should say Rabbi Jack. Man, it's good to hear from you. How are you, brother?
Well, thank you, Neil, and thank you, Fred. I am wonderful today, and just delighted to be back with you on the show talking about this very important subject right now.
Yeah, just to clarify, since I keep tripping over that pastor-rabbi thing, in the New Testament, the word elder, shepherd, pastor, they're in some ways synonymous. You don't really see, I don't think. Help me understand. Is there a place in where they really distinguish a Messianic Jewish rabbi as leading the children of God, even though most of the early believers were Jews who had come to faith in Christ? So I don't know. I apologize. I keep calling you pastor when you're Rabbi Jack, but anyway, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I do, Neil, and thank you. Obviously a pastor first and foremost is a shepherd, and it's a wonderful, wonderful calling that God gives. And a rabbi is a teacher, and a messianic rabbi, if you will, is one who teaches, if you will, both the Old and the New Testaments, and accepts the entire Bible as the Word of God. But yes, I am a pastor as well, so I'm both a pastor and a rabbi, and so either one is fine.
Okay.
And whichever one, my friend, you feel comfortable with, in accordance with 1 Corinthians 9:20. When I'm with the Jews, I'm a Jewish rabbi. When I'm with the Christians, I'm a pastor. When I'm on NBL, I'm both.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're a friend and a wonderful guest. We love having you on the air because you have such a unique perspective as, being born a Jew, following Jesus today with an understanding of the scriptures and a lot of information to share with us about, Bible prophecy and what's happening. I just saw a note here that about 500 were killed in an Israeli airstrike on a Gaza City hospital. The war in Israel is real. Real lives are being taken. What happened when Hamas, the terrorist group, invaded Israel, drugged people away into captivity. Hamas now showing some videos and pictures of the hostages, by way of creating pressure and trying to force Israel to release Palestinian hostages, terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's crazy. It's just, we're watching this unfold in real time. And I just want to get your thoughts, because obviously this is nothing new for you as a Jew, understanding that Israel is in the crosshairs.
You're right, Neil, and I'll tell you what else is not new. The other thing that's not new is hearing either just one side of the story or a partial story. For example, the headline that you just got, and I just saw that about 10 minutes ago as well, about the hospital in Gaza City with folks obviously there who were injured, and the question is being asked right now. Israel basically said, because Gaza City is in the northern part of Gaza Strip where Israel told everybody to get out. So why would Israel bomb a hospital? Well, we always have to question who's the source. Let's get the other side of the story. The Lord tells us in his word, examine one side of the story, and then after you do that, get the other side of the story. And that way you can make, and of course I'm paraphrasing here, a fair opinion. So let me give you the full story here. The source of this information is the Gaza Health Ministry. Who is the Gaza Health Ministry? Hamas. So the first thing we've got to do is we've got to say, okay, how reputable and credible and fair is this source? Knowing that Gaza intentionally takes innocent people and puts them in a place where they can be harmed, we have to consider the possibility, because it's happened over and over and over again, that Hamas knows that people are in this hospital. Fatih Hamad, a Hamas representative, says, look, we have absolutely no problem. In fact, we love it when we can take women and children and use them as human shields and sacrifice them to accomplish what's called the CNN strategy. And the CNN strategy, and actually Neil Allen Dershowitz spoke about this, is that what Hamas will do is Hamas will intentionally take its people, put its people in harm's way, then bomb those people, and when those people die, they'll parade those bodies out on CNN and say, look, everybody, Israel did it. And so I think before we say Israeli airstrikes, because if you look at the Israeli news sites, they say, look, there's been an explosion at a hospital in Gaza. Obviously, we have no desire to target innocent people. We can't comment right now because we don't have all the facts. And I think that's the problem. I mean, you and I both know, of course, in radio and news, because prior to going into ministry, news was my background. I worked as a radio and TV news reporter for years, and we never went with a story until we either had both sides or at least thought both sides. So I think before we rush to judgment or jump to conclusions, let's get the whole story first and then make a determination.
Okay, and I'm glad you're going down that road because, people really need to wake up and consider the source of where they're getting news from. It's why so much has been said about the mainstream media versus alternative sources of news and information, which, by the way, sometimes can be incredibly inaccurate as well. But
Yep.
And biased. So I think that as believers, we've got the leading and gifting of the Holy Spirit and the ability to use true discernment. And we may never know all the facts in every circumstance, but we also know that there's a lot of spin put on news stories in order to create a perception or to fuel a narrative so that people will begin thinking a certain way, sometimes about situations or circumstances, and other times about groups of people or their ideology. One word that's been tossed around a lot is the word apartheid, which we used to, associate with South Africa. But
right.
This term has been used in light of what's happening in Israel and Gaza right now. Talk about that, because I'm sure you've got a perspective to share with us we need to hear.
Very much so. And I've got to tell you, I was, I'll be overly dramatic here. I'll use the term mortified a couple of days ago when South Africa's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, came out and said Israel is guilty of apartheid. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, time out. If there's any leader of any country who should know what apartheid really is and who should know better than to say that, it should be Cyril Ramaphosa. Let's pin down the definition, because, over the past 10 days, I've spoken at a number of churches where we've been addressing these concerns, if you will, these protests and these complaints against Israel. And I said to the church, I said, look, I'm not doing this to make any of you feel awkward, but can any of you raise your hand and give me what you feel is an honest definition of apartheid? And nobody did. And I said, that's okay. This is not a positive or a negative, but it just shows that words are thrown out and people have no idea what they mean. The definition, there are several, but when you get right down to it, the definition of apartheid is a policy or system of segregation or discrimination on the grounds of race, color, creed, or culture. So let's see what we've got. Is Israel guilty of that? Obviously, WDCX is in New York, and we pray for you because, AOC is there. I can say that.
Thank you.
Several years ago, she said, in referring to Israel, apartheid states aren't democracies. And, of course, she's part of the squad. And Ayanna Pressley has chimed in, and Cori Bush has chimed in. And, of course, Rashida Tlaib from Michigan's 12th District has chimed in several times saying, why does the U.S. continue to provide unconditional funding to support the apartheid government of Israel? Because it discriminates against Palestinians. Okay, one side of the story. And I'm amazed that there are so many who are parroting this in their protests, particularly college students who, listen, if you're going to an Ivy League school, you got in because you know how to do research. And yet they seem to be out there spouting these things, having done no research on this subject at all. It's a complete dichotomy. Here are some facts. Does Israel discriminate against Palestinians? Number one, 20% of Israel's population is Arab Muslim Palestinian, and they enjoy the same rights as Jewish citizens of Israel. They have the right to vote. They have the right to assembly. They have the right to freedom of speech. They have the right to the press. Fact number two, one of Israel's Supreme Court justices is a Palestinian. fact number 3, of Israel's Knesset, her parliament, where you have, let's say, 120 members, 10 of them Arab Muslim. So, Israel has them serving in government. And perhaps most shocking, 2 surveys a couple of years ago, Harvard University did a study where they asked Palestinians living in Israel, they said, listen, would you rather live in Israel or would you rather live in an Arab country? 80% of those surveyed said we'd rather live in Israel. Now, even the other side did a survey, because in 2015, the Palestinian Center for Public Opinion said, okay, we're going to do our own survey. We're Palestinian. We're going to hear the truth from our own people. So they surveyed Palestinians living in Israel, and more than half said, we'd rather be citizens of Israel rather than citizens in an Arab state. We love it here. So all of this begs the question, if indeed there truly is apartheid going on, and if all of these folks are truly being discriminated against, why are they so passionate about the fact that they want to stay? Would you? Would any of us? These are the types of questions that we need to ask.
Huge. And I appreciate you painting such an vivid description of this picture of the reality that it isn't as it seems when you watch the news. Now, is Israel perfect? By no means. Is any country perfect? By no means. But if what you're saying is true, and that's the way things actually are in Israel, then we're not getting an accurate picture when it comes to certainly standalone comments from people like AOC or Rashida Tlaib or any of the others who have extreme bias on an issue like this, speaking out in favor of the Palestinians and against Israel as though it's, the great Satan. Although when they refer to the United States as the great Satan, where does Israel fit in that? Do they call Israel the little Satan?
Yes, they do. Israel is the little Satan and the United States is the great Satan. And I remember the first time I heard that, and I said, well, for the Hamas or the Palestinian side, that kind of kills your argument that all of this bombing, all of this terror, all of this evil is about occupation. So if Israel is Satan because of occupation, if that's what it's all about, how in the world could the United States be Satan too? We couldn't occupy the Gaza Strip if we wanted to. My God, we're 8,000 miles away. But these are the types of comments that are constantly spewed by people who don't know any better. I'll give you an example. And, we, WDCX is a Christian radio station. We desire and we hope that being a Christian, being a believer means, hey, listen, you're going to use the Bible as your primary source, and you're not going to subscribe to something called liberation theology and social justice, which is basically, look, I don't care what the Bible says. Jesus helped the poor and oppressed, and the Palestinians are the poor and oppressed, so let's help them. I agree, but let's not help Hamas. And let's not go out there and hold protests and say, well, we're pro-Palestinian. Well, first of all, any protest that anybody should make should say, we are pro-humanity. We detest the fact that there are deaths on both sides, innocent children on both sides. But coming out and saying you're pro-Palestinian, that's a smokescreen. That's a misnomer, because what these folks are actually doing, it's not a pro-Palestinian protest. It's an anti-Israel protest, and it's an anti-Semitic protest. But you're right, Neil, and you bring up an interesting point that there is so much out there that people don't know. I'll give you an example, if I could tell you just a short story. And for our Canadian listeners, you'll appreciate this too. Some years ago, I guess it's going back about 7 or 8 years, I got into an email conversation with a pastor in Brandon, Manitoba, a church in Brandon, Manitoba, and we were talking about Israel, and he said, well, I have a lot of problems and concerns about Israel. I said, okay, let's talk about it. And he said, well, for one thing, Rabbi, I don't like the fact that in Israel they have the checkpoints and the walls that Israel built to prevent the movement of Palestinians in and out of the country. And that sentiment has been echoed so many times over the past 10 days since the Hamas attacks occurred on October 7th. I mean, how many times already have we heard the term open-air prison? that Israel is keeping the Palestinians in an open-air prison because they won't let them come into Israel, and that's what the walls are for. And I wrote back to this pastor. I said, okay, pastor, so you're saying that the checkpoints and walls are up and Palestinians can't come in, and that's why Israel built those things. Well, if that was the motivation for Palestinians, period, not to come in, then Israel isn't doing a very good job. Because the fact of the matter is, each and every single day, 50,000 or more Palestinians move in and out through those checkpoints and walls. They come into Israel to work. 7-day week, that's more than 250,000 people. 350,000 Palestinians coming in and out through those checkpoints. My gosh, Israel, you're not doing a really good job. Why'd you put the walls up if it's not preventing them from coming in? Because Israel has no problem preventing the good guys from coming in. The walls and the checkpoints and the fences were put up to keep the bad guys, to keep the terrorists out who were murdering innocent women and children. And the fact is, Neil, and a lot of people don't know this, since the walls and the checkpoints went up, fewer innocent Israelis and fewer innocent Palestinians living in Israel have died. So I said to this pastor, Pastor, you don't like the wall? Okay, so would you suggest that Israel take the wall back down so that the death toll can go back up, like it did on October 7th? And I never heard from him again. People are just reacting out of emotion and not thinking. And we as believers need to get the truth of the word out and, help to clarify these people, help to give them the other side of the story.
What's the history of the Gaza Strip? And you mentioned Ariel Sharon several conversations ago. I forget when exactly that was, but how this whole Gaza Strip came to be in the first place and what the intention was. Is it exactly what you're describing?
You bet. In fact, the Gaza Strip and what's going on there right now came as a result of a desire for Israel to accommodate pressure from other nations who kept saying, give away land for peace, give away land for peace, give away land for peace. It always works. Israel, by the way, did that in 1947 under the United Nations partition plan when Arabs kept rioting since the point of the Balfour Declaration. And the UN basically said, look, they're not going to stop rioting until you give the Arabs land. And Israel gave the Arabs land and said, great, now everything will be terrific. And the following day, the Arabs attacked Israel and tried to wipe her off the face of the earth, like Hamas and other terrorist groups say was their intention all the time. It's never been about land for peace. We have a saying, you don't get the bully to go away if you keep giving him your lunch money. And part of the history of the Gaza Strip, Israel actually acquired this in a defensive war. We're talking about the Six-Day War from June the 4th through the 10th of 1967. In the early 2000s, many Jewish people were living in the Gaza Strip. They had settlements there. When Ariel Sharon was prime minister in 2005, he basically said, look, we need to try land for peace again. Let's everyone who's in an Israeli settlement leave your homes. The Gaza Strip is not your home anymore. Come on into Israel. We'll find a place for you to settle. That's what we're going to do. And we got out. And can you imagine Israeli policemen and policewomen crying as they have to escort their own brothers and sisters out of their homes? But that's what we did in the name of peace. At that time, Israel also had agricultural businesses. They are greenhouses, plants, fruits, vegetables, irrigation hoses, and said, you know what, we're going to leave all of this for the Palestinians because we want them to come in and have a running business to give them momentum to bring in an income. So Palestinians come in. It's all about land for peace. The first thing the Palestinians do, tear down the greenhouses, cut up the hoses, destroy everything. And people are scratching their heads saying, why in the world would the Palestinians do that? Israel extended an olive branch. And the Palestinians, a.k.a. Hamas, basically said, we don't need anything. We don't want anything from those Jews. We're going to basically have success on our own. And where the greenhouses used to be, the very next day, Hamas put up launching pads and said, thank you, Israel, so much. Now we're so close to you now that we can obliterate you and wipe you off the face of the earth, which we've been telling you is what our goal has been for years. Why do you keep giving us land if you know what our true agenda is? And there you go, Neil.
Yeah. So, and, to underscore the point you just made, somebody said recently, how do you negotiate a peace deal with somebody who says our ultimate goal is to kill you and wipe you off the face of the earth? We really don't want peace. We want you gone. We want to exterminate you. And that's the position that Israel has had to take, not just from Palestinians, but from Palestinian terrorists who are part of this group Hamas, right? I mean, this is all about wiping Israel off the map.
Exactly. And in fact, their own Hamas charter of 2017 that they revised says that. Here are some quotes from their charter. Peaceful solutions to resolve the Palestinian problem are all contrary to the beliefs of the Islamic resistance movement. What are they saying? Two-state solution? No, that would be achieved by peace. Nope, sorry, we can't have that. We need to wipe you off the face of the earth. And so it amazes me. You know, I alluded to Alan Dershowitz before, law professor, teacher, attorney, brilliant, brilliant man. And I admire very much everything that he says, except I don't understand where he's coming from when he says, listen, we got to push toward a two-state solution. And I wonder if he's being serious or if he's saying that with a kind of, hush, hush, wink, wink, because he, as well as so many other people, know that there's not going to be, you can't have a two-state solution when one of the supposed states says, no, the only answer is for one state. And that's something else Hamas says in its charter. They say this: Palestine extends from the River Jordan in the east to the Mediterranean in the west, from Lebanon, I'm using the country name rather than the city name in Arabic, and from Lebanon in the north to Egypt in the south. That is the home of the Palestinian people. There shall be no recognition to the legitimacy of the Zionist entity. And the borders that I just gave you right now are being occupied by another country, Israel.
Yeah.
And Hamas basically says, yeah, those are our borders. And when you've got that type of statement, it's another way of saying, no two-state solution. No, we don't even want the Jews in Iceland. We want them dead. And that's why Hezbollah now, which is attacking Israel from the north, several years ago, the head of Hezbollah, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, came out with a statement saying, listen, you need to kill Muslims, Islam, you need to kill the Jews wherever they are. Now, what in the world does that have to do with a two-state solution? Even more so, let me, just bounce back here to occupation. If it's all about supposed occupation, if this is Palestinian land, and by the way, Arabs who are in the know that it's not, and we can get to that in a minute. But if it's only about occupation, if your case is with Israel, why in the world tell Muslims to go kill Jews, say, in Australia or Denmark or Africa or South America? None of this makes any sense at all.
It's shocking. We got to take a break. We're going to be back in a moment. Rabbi Jack Zimmerman is our guest. He is a speaker. He's an apologist. He's a prophecy expert, and he is the rabbi at Tree of Life Congregation in Phoenix, Arizona. Originally from the New York City area, and he's become a friend. He speaks all over the world, and he'll be in our area in the not-too-distant future. We'll have info on that hopefully a little bit later for you. But if you want to join the conversation, something he said has sparked your interest, you've got a question, you want to share a comment, feel free to join us. I'm opening the phone lines right here, 800-684-2848 or 883-5000, 800-684-2848 or 883-5000. How do you negotiate with somebody who says, I want to exterminate you? There's no negotiation. We'll talk about that as we continue here on NBL. Our program brought to you by Clarity Pregnancy Options, a wonderful pro-life organization in the Niagara region, meeting the needs of women facing unplanned pregnancies. They're in Welland, Niagara Falls, and St. Catharines. Clarity Pregnancy Options. Or go to Tree of Life Congregation, I think it is .org. But you're also a representative of Jewish Voice Ministries, and I want to ask you about that before we continue here. By the way, if you want to join us, any question, any comment, 800-684-2848 or 883-5000. You guys are deeply embedded in the work of the kingdom in Israel and supporting ministries and organizations there. Can you talk about your affiliation or your work with Jewish Voice Ministries?
I would be delighted to, Neil. I've been with Jewish Voice Ministries International now for the better part of 19 years, and this is a ministry that fully understands and carries out the directive of what Paul talked about in Romans 1:16, to bring the gospel first to the Jews and also to the nations, to engage the church in understanding the Jewish foundations of Christianity, to bless Israel. And when we say bless Israel, right now, just so folks know, it's important to have boots on the ground. And we work with 85 partner ministries on the ground in Israel who, as we're speaking, desperately need support to be able to get aid to soldiers who are in the field right now, waiting on the border by the Gaza Strip, to pregnant mothers and single mothers who've been affected by this, by families who've been displaced. They no longer have homes. They no longer have vehicles. There's a shortage of food. To provide grief counseling, many folks have lost loved ones. And so for those who are listening right now, if you would like to support this worthy cause, and by the way, part and parcel of this is we make sure first and foremost to get the word out and share the good news of Yeshua, of Jesus. Because listen, not every ministry that uses terms like Jewish and Christian does that. Anytime you give to a ministry, we should always give saying, does this ministry promote the gospel? Because not everybody does. But on our website where you can give is jewishvoice.org/Israel. And I encourage folks, and thank you so much, please prayerfully consider doing that, because there are so many who need your help and support right now. I'll give you an example. We have drivers who need to go throughout the country to deliver necessary supplies. And some of the money, some of the financing that they will be receiving goes actually to put gas in their vehicles. You know, we think gas is high here. It's $8 a gallon in Israel. So
wow.
we really would appreciate your support.
Yeah. And how long have you been affiliated with Jewish Voice Ministries International? Quite a while, right?
Quite a while. I'm actually going. I'm starting my 20th year with Jewish Voice Ministries, and I am just so thankful that there is an organization like this where first and foremost the gospel, the good news, is our heart, and we desire that it go out through all of the nations, just as Yeshua, just as Jesus said in the Olivet Discourse.
All right, jewishvoice.org. That's jewishvoice.org/Israel. So our guest here is Rabbi Jack Zimmerman, originally from the New York area. Was it Brooklyn? Is that right?
It was. Yes, I was from the other Holy Land, Brooklyn, New York. And, I'll tell you an even funnier story. I guess when I was about 12 years old, my dad came home, and he said, I'm there and Mom's there, and he said, all right, I have an announcement to make. And I'm just, yes. He said, and this is when we were living in Brooklyn, he said, we're moving to the country. And I'm thinking, where could that be? And he said, Staten Island. And I went, oh, for God's sake.
That's
Staten
hilarious.
Island was the country back then. I mean, this was the early 1970s. The Verrazano Bridge had only been up for about 7 or 8 years, and but obviously things have changed.
Well, in case you're wondering how Jack has such a good sense of humor, it's God-given, it's a talent, it's a gift. And by the way, he used to use that as a stand-up comic before God moved in his heart in such a way as to lead him towards becoming rabbi of a congregation and speaking about Bible prophecy and stuff. But Jack, you are a lot of fun to talk to, and just love your heart. And obviously, your love for the Jewish people, given the fact that you yourself are Jewish. What does it feel like when you hear people calling for your extermination? And by the way, I had a conversation with someone the other day. They were at a Palestinian, protest saying that Israel is an apartheid state and all the things we talked about just a few minutes ago. And the people present were literally chanting, you ready for this? Gas the Jews. How in the world, when you've got groups like Black Lives Matter and others that are calling for equity and justice, tolerance used to be a big word. Now it's full acceptance, whatever. But all this social justice kind of stuff for all people, and yet at these rallies they're chanting "Gas the Jews." What's your take on that?
There are two things that come to mind. First, and most importantly, forgive them, Lord, they know not what they do. And second, they don't have all the facts, but they don't want to seek all the facts. I'll give you an example. Some years ago, and this is a perfect example, I was asked to be the keynote speaker at the Governor's Prayer Breakfast at Carroll College in Helena, Montana. It was a beautiful Saturday morning. We had about, 800, 900 people who gathered together. And about an hour before the protest, I had a woman come up to me and she said, Rabbi Jack, I just want to let you know there were protesters outside. And I smiled and I said, really? I want to go out and meet them. She said, oh, no, don't do that. They're protesters. I said, don't worry. It's okay. I'm from New York. And so I walked outside and, I don't care. And there are these, two protesters. And I'm thinking, oh, for crying out loud. And then the Lord reminded me, well, look, Jack, you have to start somewhere. But and they're both holding up, they're both holding up signs. And the guy is holding up a sign that says, Christ is peace. And I said, man, I love your sign. And the girl next to him is holding up a sign that says Free Palestine. And, the comedian in me wanted to say, oh, it's free. Last week it was $2. I'll take it. But I took this seriously. And I said, why are you holding up that sign? And she went through the same stuff, the same objections about Israel, the same straw man objections that we're hearing today. Well, Israel is occupying Palestinian land. They're putting up the walls. Israel engaging in apartheid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, okay, I've got a question for you. Actually, I've got a couple. I said, are you familiar with what was called the UN Partition Plan of 1947? She said, no. I said, have you ever heard of Yasser Arafat? She said, no. I said, Anwar Sadat, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, 1973. I'm going through a whole laundry list. Right down the list, each and every one, she kept saying no. And then I said to her, and then why are you holding up this sign? Look, it's a beautiful Saturday morning in Helena, Montana. You should be hiking on the hills and enjoying God's grace and providence over this beautiful state. I said, what are you doing? I said, doesn't it bother you that you are out here taking a stand for a cause that you know nothing about? I said, go home and do your research on the things that I asked you and more. Find out about how this all started. And I promise you, if you do, and if you have a fair and balanced mind to say, okay, I'm willing to admit the truth, even though I can't save face, which I so much want to do, but I'll accept the truth, then I promise you, you won't come out here with a sign like that ever again. And the same problem exists today, multiplied by pro-Palestinian, and again, it's not pro-Palestinian, it's pro-terror protests going on all over the United States. And who knows, maybe even Canada. I mean, for our Canadian listeners, guys, you all know how liberal Montreal can get. And, I'm concerned about what may happen there if it hasn't already.
Yeah. Help us understand the word Palestine. The reason I bring that up is because clearly there are Palestinians who live in Israel. There are Palestinian Christians, and obviously there are Palestinian terrorists. Not everybody that lives in Gaza is a terrorist, but the members of Hamas are the ones who breached that wall, came into Israel unexpected, and just carried out horrific acts, killing innocent people, dragging away hostages, et cetera, et cetera. It was almost a Pearl Harbor of sorts. Number one, is there really a Palestinian state? When people talk about a two-state settlement, Israel exists and is a nation. Is Palestine a nation, or is it just a region? And then also, how is it that the terrorists were able to sneak up on Israel like this? Israel has pretty sophisticated IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and intelligence, et cetera. How did they pull this kind of thing off? Those are two prominent questions.
Very, very good questions. And I'll answer the second question first on how Hamas was able to pull this off. One of the ways that Hamas was able to pull this off, one word, diversion. Before the ground attacks came and the fence was breached from southern Israel into the Gaza Strip, Hamas launched multitudes of rockets over into Israel. And so the direction, the focus of the Mossad and the IDF was, okay, let's deal with that situation. While those rockets were flying in the air under that cover, Hamas went in through the breach in the fence. And the IDF commanders have even said, look, they caught us unawares. They caught us sleeping. And to me, it was somewhat of a surprise because, if you would think that if there's any day where Israel would definitely be more on alert than at any other time, it would be on the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War of 1973. It was on the exact same day. And obviously, all of the Israeli commanders can say, hey, look, they caught us unawares. We should have been much more prepared and more ready. In regard to Palestine, is it a nation? Is it a country? Has it ever been? I'm going to give you a very typical Jewish answer, and it's also a correct answer. On the one hand, absolutely not. On the other hand, yeah, maybe. And let me explain. The origin of the word Palestine comes from the Italian word or the Roman word Palestina. When Rome had rulership over Jerusalem, and you read your Bible, you'll see this in the New Testament, obviously. Israel was under Rome's thumb. Toward the latter stages of Rome's control over Israel, Rome actually renamed the land Palestina, which is the word, actually, the Roman word for the English word Philistine. Rome thought the greatest way they could hurt and offend and insult Israel was by naming the Holy Land after Israel's greatest enemy at the time, the Philistines. Fast forward, my goodness, to after Israel becomes a state in 1948, and Arabs go on radio saying, hey, Israel, we're going to attack you tomorrow, and so we want all our Arabs living in Israel to get out of Israel and run away from Israel and run to the borders to fight you. And that's exactly what happened. And Israel said no to those Arabs living in Israel. Please stay. You're our brothers. You're our sisters. You're our friends. Don't run to the borders. We'll send our sons and daughters to fight for you. So what happened? The Arabs ran to the borders, fought with, to side with their own countries, fought against Israel. As we know, and history shows this, Israel defeated every single one of them. And when those Arabs who'd been living in Israel said, okay, I guess our side lost, let me just go back into the country, they obviously and understandably had a little problem doing that because Israeli police said, no, your goal was to destroy us, you can't come back. And they said, well, where are we going to go? And the police said, well, why don't you knock on Syria's door or Jordan's door or Egypt's door or Iraq's door? You are willing to risk your life for them. Surely they'll find a place for you. And none of those countries wanted them then. And the fact of the matter is that none of those countries want them now. No wonder Egypt didn't want to open up the gate from Gaza to Rafah. They've never wanted them. And so for all those years, you have all these people now without a country. It's their own fault, ending up becoming refugees until in the early 1960s, one among them rose up and he said, I got an idea. Let's take an identity. With what's going on in society today, people say, I identify as this, and people accept it. This is not the first time. In the 1960s, he said, let's call ourselves Palestinians, and that way everybody will think that we're the original settlers on the land, and that way we can tell everybody that since we were the original settlers, that we got kicked out, and it's our land, and we deserve to have it back. Before Israel became a state in 1948, the land under the Balfour Declaration, under the British Mandate, was actually called Palestine. But that was way before people called themselves Palestinians. In fact, back then, for an Arab to say he was a Palestinian, no way. They denigrated the term. And that has been the ruse ever since. But it's interesting because Yasser Arafat, obviously, is the gentleman I was talking about who established the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, the predecessor to these terror groups. And in 1977, one of their committee members, the guy's name was Zahir Hussein. In 1977, he did an interview with the Dutch newspaper Trouw, and they asked him the question that you've asked me, where did this whole Palestinian thing come from? And he said, look, I'm going to be honest with you. There's no such thing as a Palestinian. The whole thing is a ruse. We only call ourselves Palestinians because that is the way we feel that we're going to be able to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. The whole thing has been a ruse ever since. Those who refer to themselves as Palestinians, who are in the highest levels of the PLO, admit to the world, guys, get a clue. We made it up. And there's your answer, Neil.
Unbelievable. All right, when we come back, final segment here with Rabbi Jack Zimmerman. We're going to ask him about the biblical significance of all this and how we as believers should be responding. What is God saying to the church in the West right now? We're going to find out when MBL returns. And by the way, don't forget to go to jewishvoice.org/Israel to give in support of some 80-plus organizations that Jewish Voice is working with on the ground right now in Israel, and they have been for many years. NBL Today brought to you by Leslie Smith, Christian lawyer in Southern Ontario. You know, how do we... I want to give you the final opportunity, by the way, to talk again about Jewish Voice and the Israel connection. But just the last question: as believers, I think that there's a lot of prophetic significance here. But I want to hear you talk about that. And some people are afraid, of that reality. But on the other hand, fulfilled Bible prophecy and signs that lead to the coming of Christ and stuff are really the paving stones that lead to our redemption, that our Savior is coming back. One day we're going to see Jesus, and he's victorious. He's not defeated. There's great hope in that. So what's your take on all this, and what should we as believers in the West be thinking or doing right now to be a support to Israel, but also to react properly to all that's going on?
Thank you for that, Neil. And as you were asking that question, 4 words came to mind: your redemption draweth nigh. And what we're seeing right now is part of the fulfillment of prophecy. I know we spoke recently, and we talked about these nations. Some aren't nations, of course, just entities or radical groups coming against Israel, and how so many of them line up with the prophecy of the coalition of nations found in Psalm 83. It's just a fascinating connection. How, Biblos, let's say, or Gebal points to Palestinians or Hamas, and we're seeing that happen in our time. But also in terms of prophecy, what's really interesting is I want to just draw our attention for a moment to Isaiah chapter 60, verse 18. I was looking at this verse yesterday, and the bells and whistles went off, and I said, thank you, Lord. It's right there. Now listen what it says. First, I'll read it in the English, and then I'll tell you what part of the Hebrew says. I'll say part of it in the Hebrew, and when I do, I'm sure there will be a collective gasp all over the Niagara region today. But in the English, it says, violence shall no more be heard in your land, wasting nor destruction within your borders, but you shall call your walls salvation, and your gates you shall call praise. And the first words in Hebrew start off like this: Lo yisama od. Here's what's not going to be heard: Hamas. Violence.
Wow.
Hamas will no more be heard in your land. There will be no more wasting. There will not be no more destruction by your borders. But you will call your walls around you and the walls of the old city salvation, and your gates praise. And that's a reminder. It's wonderful, because that's a reminder that through everything that is going on right now, what does the Lord promise to Israel? He says, he who watches over Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. We know that one day he will send his salvation, his Redeemer, to come and bring about a new Jerusalem, an even greater Jerusalem, a new heaven and a new earth. And so while the scriptures tell us, look, these things that we're going through now must happen, we know the end of the book, and it's a great and wonderful story.
Absolutely. And obviously we can be praying for peace in Jerusalem, which means also praying for salvation for Jews and Arabs alike, that those who don't know the Lord around the globe, including our neighbors, would come to know Jesus. We should be praying about that. So we can pray for things like peace and discernment on the part of military officials and governmental leaders, et cetera. But overall, we want to be directly involved in being a support to the people of Israel, and I guess we can do that through Jewish Voice.
You can indeed. And Jewish Voice Ministries right now has 85 partner organizations that are on the ground in Israel. They are rushing food and aid to IDF soldiers in combat. They're housing, feeding, clothing, caring for individuals and families displaced by this war, providing trauma counseling and mercy care to people who've lost loved ones, caring for pregnant and single mothers who, these mothers were already vulnerable even before the war broke out, caring for lone soldiers who are in the IDF who don't have family, getting medical supplies all over Israel, hosting prayer gatherings, worship services, and obviously spreading the good news. And the way that you can do that, everybody, is jewishvoice.org/ Israel. Go to their website. And also, I've had the blessing, Neil, and I'm so glad that you and I have had the opportunity to talk. I just got back yesterday from speaking at a wonderful church in Oklahoma that said, we get it. We understand the directive of blessing Israel, of blessing her people, but also of helping those who are innocent on both sides. Again, these pro-Palestinian rallies, if there's any rally, they should be pro-humanity rallies. God's desire is that none should perish, that all should have everlasting life. And an innocent life is precious, regardless of what kind of label is on it. And I want to thank that church in Oklahoma for having me come. And if there are pastors or churches listening, and you would like Jewish Voice Ministries personally to come and speak on this or just about any topic, biblical topic at your church, get in touch with me, Rabbi Jack Zimmerman at Jewish Voice Ministries. My email, if I can give that out,
sure,
is J Zimmerman. So it's the first letter of my first name followed by my last, all one word, J Zimmerman at jewishvoice.org.
All right, J Zimmerman at jewishvoice.org. You can give, you can learn more about the work of Jewish Voice Ministries by going to jewishvoice.org/Israel. Rabbi Jack, you're welcome here anytime. We love you, brother, and so grateful that you could join us here on WDCX.
Well, thank you. We love you, too. So appreciate the time, Neil, and perhaps the next time I would love to be there live in the studio. I miss my home state, and thanks again for having me today.
All right, face-to-face, you got it. We'll see you soon. That's Rabbi Jack Zimmerman, Jewish Voice Ministries.